This is Arts and Entertainment.
With Chris and Randall.
I'm Chris.
I'm Randall.
Hi, and welcome to our show, where we discuss stuff about arts and entertainment from a spontaneous conversation where we have no idea what we're going to say, but we're going to try our best to sound like we mean something. If you've never heard this show before, like and subscribe. And if you've already heard this show, please like and subscribe because you already like this show. Randall, what is today's topic?
This is something I've been thinking about for a while. I feel like we're in the media era we're in now, the cultural era we're in now is the era of the fanboy. And I think it supersedes the era of mass media, which we're exiting.
The fanboy.
That's right.
The era of the fanboy. Okay, let's take a moment, folks, just to explain what we mean by the word fanboy. So how would you define fanboy?
Well, I think fanboy is a word that comes out of comic book culture, especially more like 10 years ago, 20 years ago than today. But the fanboy is a figure. He's somebody who is just obsessed with a certain intellectual property, okay? Like he's obsessed with Batman or is obsessed with Superman, and he knows everything about Batman and Superman. He has no criticism to level, hardly.
Whoa.
Sometimes.
Well, we're getting a little too far into it. I mean, I just want to keep more of a general. First off, even though it's called fanboy, the term can just as easily be applied to a female. So it has to be a man. It could be a fangirl. It's just the word, which does come out of comic books, almost a play on the sidekick name. You know, it was a time in the 40s and 50s where everybody except for Robin, who was a sidekick, was, Kid Flash, Wonder Girl, so it is I remember it 30 years ago in comic books, the term being used for somebody. And I definitely would say that, prior to the word fanboy, people used to just use the word geek. There was a time where all the superheroes had a Robin of a sort, a Kid Flash, a Wonder Girl. There was always, and often fanboy was like, well, what is you're a sidekick, your superpower, a keen turn of derision. I honestly will say in history used interchangeably because I don't think you have to be a guy to totally geek out on something. And I would definitely say it's certainly grown from the comic book world to apply to just about any art form where you take the art form as seriously as if it were reality, as if it was more than just art.
Yeah, the fanboy always took the property, the subject very seriously, right? They
Well, I mean, if you're a fanboy, look, I'm a fanboy. This show is dedicated to fanboys and fangirls everywhere. If you're watching this show, there's a very strong chance you're a fanboy or a fangirl. And there is something in art that you are very intense about that really matters a lot to you. And I think I'm just saying. So as a term, I mean, I'm just saying. 10 years ago, he would have said this person's a geek or this is a nerd. But now fanboy is the singular word.
Well, this is the thing. I think that in the past, the fanboy was an unusual figure, right? It was unusual to be a fanboy.
It was just somebody. No, they were just called a nerd. They didn't have a lot of power, and it might have been something that you would keep to yourself after you got out of middle school.
Well, I think the word fanboy though was used within for lack of better terms, used within nerd and geek communities. It wasn't like a normie, for lack of good terms. A normie would call somebody a fanboy.
A fanboy, I guess, it's often I used to hear it from the writers, this is and again, comics is what I know, but, in comic book world, it'd be like, the reference to Tony Stark's original armor in the first Iron Man movie, which is gray. And then you see the gold one. That's for the fanboys out there who remember exactly what he looked like. Or in the Hulk movie, for just a split second, he's got gray skin, not green skin. That's a reference. So often, fanboy is being used almost to say, there's an Easter egg that only a fanboy would get, or we did something for the loyalist members of our community.
Right. I mean,
but you can hear it in anything. You can hear it in movies, TV, music. I mean, is there an art form that you don't really hear fanboy applied to?
Well, it comes out of comic book culture, wouldn't you say?
Right, but I'm saying, but it's grown now to cover just about every
Right. Well, this
aspect
is
of
my
art.
point. This is my point. Is like I think that like there was a time when the fanboy was an aberration. It was an you were unusual if you're a fanboy. And now it's like I feel like now uh, we're going to majority fanboy.
Well, I
I
don't
mean, we're
think you
going
get
to a
you
world
don't you
where
don't
most
get
people are fanboys now.
you don't get you don't you, it's no longer a form of embarrassment. I mean, it used to be when I was much younger. It was a point of after middle school, definitely after high school, definitely after college. It made you seem like somehow you were somebody who didn't grow up, or you were crazy and you didn't understand reality. Like, oh my God, this guy has, or uh, let's say, this guy has seen every episode of the original Star Trek series. What a nerd, what a geek. Or this guy can quote Klingon, what a nerd, what a geek. And then you had conventions. It's like Star Trek. I'll pick on Star Trek for a second, right? In Star Trek, people all of a sudden started like making these very authentic costumes, and then they started writing down Klingon as a language, and then all of a sudden you have cosplay, and you have these. I mean, you have beautiful work, and at some point, and I do think it might have been more with like science fiction and comic books, Dungeons and Dragons. That once you started seeing people making models of ships, or people building their own costumes, or writing down the entire language of Klingon, that is, I guess, at least visually, that's when you go, wow, there's a craft. And maybe that is where it started to begin to become more of a positive.
Well, I feel like the people that were Trekkies back in the olden days. I'm talking about like you're talking about like back in the 70s, after the series was canceled,
Yeah.
and they wanted to bring it back, and they started conventions, and they were like super fans. So those were some of the early fanboys. I feel like, see, those
But at
people,
some point, it became more of an art form. I mean, I went to cons in the 70s and 80s, and I see today, like the cons of today are nothing like, it was a hippie fest. It was a bunch of maladjusted kids and a bunch of hippies. But now, San Diego Comic-Con is what, 150,000
it's mainstream
people?
now. This is my point, right? It's like
Yeah.
so I think the people back then, I mean, to finish my thought, the people back then, I feel like they were on the cutting edge of culture. They were they were on the avant-garde. The Trekkies, they were the avant-garde of art and culture, and
It was
people
definitely
didn't
part of
realize
that
it at the
era.
time.
It was definitely part of that era because, while I mean, I never went to a Star Trek convention. I did go to conventions in the 70s as a kid and in the 80s. And, in a comic book convention, there'd be a lot of Star Trek stuff. You didn't have to be a purist. You could see a Star Trek stuff at conventions. Conventions were used for promotions, but I'll say this much. I'm sure this is true in sci-fi. I just know comics better. But when I was a kid, and you went to a comic book convention, you could meet Stan Lee, and you could ask him questions about Spider-Man and the Fantastic Four. So my first introduction to fanboy culture as being a positive, outside of the three friends I had in seventh grade, was when I started going to comic book conventions. Because in comic book conventions, there's just everybody in the room is a fanboy or a fangirl. Everybody in the room is, even if they're just wearing not like a button or a T-shirt that has Iron Man's face on it, or Alpha Flight, or someone is dressed like Sasquatch from Alpha Flight. And by the way, if you guys don't know what I'm talking about, that's even more fanboy, because fanboy is often a language that is only understood by people who are as equally dedicated to it. So yeah, you guys all know about Klingon, but how many of you can really speak in whatever? I don't know Star Trek. Damn it. Well, do you know the history of? My point is, what is my point? We're not editing this part out, folks. You're just watching me have a brain.
So what is
fart
your
and
point? Go ahead.
Oh, my part is, when I went to conventions, all of a sudden there were hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of people of all ages and backgrounds who all were a fanboy of a sort, who I could just, completely stranger. I will never have met before and we'll never meet again. And we could spend like 30 minutes about talking about who's a better friend to Iron Man, Jim Rodney Rhodes, or who read all the different issues. And then I could ask Stan Lee, hey, Stan, the man, about this particular issue of Iron Man, where he loses to the Mandarin because, he wasn't paying attention. He seems like the kind of guy that if he was a designer of machines, he would pay attention to those details. Whatever picayune question you had, Stan Lee was actually very glib, but I could ask somebody who's a writer on a current comic book a very, very specific question. And because they're writers who know their characters, they could give me a very, very specific answer. So now I feel like the world I think the convention center, everyone from that period of the convention center has now left that world and taken over the world. We're no longer just, a few hundred people in a Hilton.
Well, I feel like what's happened is everybody is a fanboy now, and okay, Chris, you're not going to like this, but I want to go back to,
I'm not going to like,
you're not going to like my diversion here, but I want to go back to the earlier era before the fanboy. I'm talking about like,
this.
I'm talking about like the birth of communism. Okay. Like the start of the Soviet Union. I think that I have read in the early days of the Soviet Union, they wired the entire country with a PA system, okay, so that they could make announcements every day, every morning. The government could, and everybody in the country could hear it. And then when radio comes in, that replaced the PA system. Everybody could have a radio, and there was only one station in the Soviet Union. I visited the Soviet Union in the 90s. I stayed in Moscow in a hotel, and there was a radio in my hotel room. Every hotel room had a radio mounted to the wall. And each radio, and this is in the 90s, okay, so nothing changed. Each radio had one dial. And I swear to God, there was no off button on the dial. You could just turn it all the way down so that the volume was like all the way down, but there was no click. You know what I mean? So I mean, so I'm saying that like the previous to the fanboy era, you have an era of mass media and the powers that be use mass media, to influence the population. But, thanks to the internet, we have an era where the audience is totally fractured and they're factionalized, and the audience is free to gravitate toward whatever properties, whatever ideas they want to gravitate towards. I mean, this isn't only just happening in comic books. I mean, you can see this happening
it's
in politics.
Well, but politics
I mean,
is not
look
an
at
art
modern
form.
politics, how they talk about it being polarized. It's like it's the same process. It's the same process.
Politics is not an art form, and therefore I think you're confusing fanaticism with fanboys or zealotry with fanboys, because politics has a basis in reality, whereas fanboys, fangirls, they're looking at art as if they were reality, or even if it is reality, they're making myths out of it. I'll pick on music for a second, because there's an area of fanboyism I think we both share, right? Like, were you ever like really deep into any particular musician or musical group?
Well, I was in Nirvana when it came out years ago.
So there's the reality that is Kurt Cobain and Dave Grohl and the other guys. But then there was all like the stories, the rumors, the mythos behind the band, so that when you're listening to the songs, it informs the lyrics, right? Or maybe you ever like just decode the lyrics to Come As You Are, and you're like, what he's really saying here as a known enemy. If you understand what it was like to be Kurt Cobain and to suffer from paranoia and not knowing who to trust, this is not just like a radio song. This is really about a man's plea for reality and help. That kind of level of fanboyism, which, by the way, if you got me talking on the Beatles, you can't shut me off. I'll do that. Like the song Help, John Lennon wrote that as a cry for help because he was having psychological issues. So people think it's a cute song. But really, if you listen to it, help me if you can, I'm feeling down. And I do appreciate you being around. Help me get my feet back off the ground. Would you please help me now? So that is an example of me even taking real things and confabulating it with art to come up with something else that may or may not even be true.
Well, I don't know. I see the same cultural process going on in politics and art, all culture. It's just
There's
people.
similarities.
Well, what it is, this is the process. It's that there is, let's say, a meme, and people gravitate towards the meme. But usually, you need more than a meme. You need a figure, right? You need like a character or a politician or some. It's usually either a person or a fictional person, and people gravitate towards that person, right? And they they become a fanatic of that person, right? I mean, uh, and you can see it with, well, you can definitely see it with Trump supporters, right? But I
Well, but
mean, it happens
I
in,
really think you're losing the thread. I mean, you have a really good thread, which is what is culture and society like now that it's okay to be a fanboy? I mean, I see where you're going with fanaticism in politics, but yeah, I get where you're coming
okay,
from.
in the
But I
mainstream
think,
media, this is the difference. In the mainstream media era, and see, we're old enough to remember this, Chris, right? Now you tell me if you remember this, but in the mainstream media era, if something's in the mainstream media, everybody's exposed to it. Everybody has everybody watches the same hit TV show. Everybody, watch the same news report,
yeah,
and then everybody can have an opinion on it, and not everybody's opinion is going to be the same, right? But this is an era where today's era is an era where you only consume media that you're like a fan of.
okay, well then,
So the
but
criticism is dead. There's no.
I see where you're
This is the
I see where you're
criticism-free
going.
era.
I disagree. I actually think that fanboys are hypercritical. I think, in fact, let's really pick on where you really see the impact of the fanboy the most. Let's talk about the Marvel movies. Let's talk about the superhero films, right? I mean, I'll even open up to DC. So, like, when I was a kid, a superhero movie would be like Superman, the motion picture, which a very mainstream film, kind of a comedy, kind of a romantic comedy, Superman. So when I was a kid, comic book movies were not really for comic book readers. They were for people who may have, like, there's Superman the motion picture, which strangely enough is my favorite Superman movie. But in it you can tell just by the choices of the story, the comedic over the top acting, it's done like a great big old comedy with a little bit of romance, but it's not really like what a Superman comic book would have been like in 1977. I think you can have a really great discussion about how fanboys have really changed the cinematic landscape. It's the easiest one by just looking at 1978 Superman the motion picture versus the first Iron Man movie. I think that's 2008. Whereas the first Superman movie, lovely people behind it. I mean, Ilya Suckland was the producer. The guy who wrote The Godfather wrote the screenplay. It was directed by a great action film director named Richard Donner. Christopher Reeve is wonderful as Superman, and Gene Hackman is hysterical as Lex Luthor. In every way, shape, and form, it's a really solid, romantic, comedic action film. It's very lighthearted and joyous. And maybe it does capture what Superman would have been like in 1950. But if you picked up a comic in 1978 and read Superman, which is what I was doing at the time, you would realize there's almost nothing about it that really tracked with the comic book. Not his job, not his attitude, the goofy nature of the movie just wasn't there at all in the comic. But that's because at the time, the people who made Superman, and they really were making a expensive, well-made movie, weren't fanboys of Superman. They were grown-ups who may or may not have read Superman as a kid, and they just had like a fondness for the memory of what that felt like for them, and they wanted to make a movie that would appeal to mainstream audiences and young people who they thought who weren't so familiar with what makes Superman special. And that's fine. It's a great movie. But you get to Iron Man, the first Iron Man, and Jon Favreau. he goes on MySpace and he starts asking people who he should cast as Tony Stark. And, there was a couple other people, like, who should he get for this part, this role? And, Robert Downey Jr., everyone wanted him because his life was so very similar to Iron Man. And actually, Jon Favreau and Robert Downey Jr. are my age. So, yeah, we all three of us read the same Iron Mans. We, in our head, had a very fixed idea that this Iron Man was a recovering or soon to be alcoholic, that this was an Iron Man who was a narcissist. This is an Iron Man who alienated people. This is an Iron Man who operated out of California and New York because he was so wealthy. But very specific choices were made that could only come about by somebody who had a real passion and wanted to make sure that the people who were most likely to show up in the theaters were the fanboys and fangirls by using social media. And that movie made so much money, I would argue that it changed superhero movies from being, at best, a stylistic Batman movie by Tim Burton into something far more a communication with the audience of loyal primary source material people and secondary source
Right.
material.
That's a great example of what we're talking about here. Iron Man versus, say, Tim Burton's Batman. I mean, Tim Burton is a director who claimed years later, I believe, on his Twitter, because he got into some Twitter argument with somebody, I forget now, where he claimed that he'd never read a comic book.
Yeah.
And the Tim Burton's Batman was based, I mean, I think the only comic book he ever read was Killing Joke.
Yeah.
And that's,
It's a
he
great
got a
comic.
lot of, he got a lot of what he used in the Batman movie on Killing Joke, but it's not
But
like,
that's such a revisionist take on Batman to begin with.
I know. So Tim Burton didn't want to be beholden by the fanboys. He didn't want to be beholden by years of Batman comics.
And Joel Schumacher was even less reverential because Joel Schumacher, his Batman, he just threw everything in the kitchen sink.
Right.
I mean,
And now right. And you fast forward to the MCU, and now you have like a franchise of movies that's just based around the comics and based around the fanboy aesthetic, right?
And in fairness to DC, if you ever watched any of the WB superhero shows, they are much better than any of the other superhero TV shows that ever existed because their layer of the things that they'll reference and continuity to the actual comic book universe of 75 years of characters is insane. They're even more fanboy, fangirl even than the Marvel movies.
Right, but there was...
I was just going to say, they just did anyhow, my point is, go ahead.
Well, there was the sense, when Tim Burton made Batman, I mean, there was a sense in Hollywood that you would take a property like Batman or Superman, you take any property, and you'd have to readapt it for the mainstream because there was a such thing as the mainstream.
And the mainstream had disdain for whatever the fanboy liked. That's like, nope, can't do that. Nope. We can't have a superhero over the age of 30. Nope, can't do that,
Right, but we live now in this environment, this world where maybe there isn't a mainstream anymore, I mean, there is no mechanism anymore that can corral the masses into a singular, aesthetic, a singular taste, right? I mean...
Well, I feel like we're saying two different things, and I think they're both equally true. I think that, yes, there are definitely a balkanization of taste. So now if all you ever want to do, and I'm going to pick on superheroes again, is watch superhero movies and superhero TV shows and listen to superhero audiobooks and wear superhero clothing, you can absolutely just spend the rest of your life in superhero world and never have to come up for air. But on the other hand, they're still making, well, at this time, they're not, but in the future and in the past, they are making movies to appeal to large groups of people who are not fans of the medium, but they're now also using fanboy appeal on top of that, right? Like Avengers Infinity War was made to be shown all over the world in countries that don't even speak English. But even in Infinity War, there are these Easter eggs or choices that are so deeply ingrained in the comic book that for those people who can appreciate it on that level, they can appreciate it on one level, and the mainstream can appreciate it on another.
Well, I think there's a sense that culture and arts used to be driven by a mainstream taste. There was a mainstream audience,
Yeah.
and when you made content for a large audience where you wanted to get a bunch of people watching, a bunch of eyeballs, you would make it for this hypothetical mainstream audience, and you would make it for this hypothetical mainstream taste. But I think in this era, people are content creators are aware they have to appeal first to their first to their fanboys if they have them, and then maybe hopefully they can try to get a mainstream audience after that. And
Well, that's certainly, it's either that or the opposite, right? Where they go and against. Like in the world of comic books today, very sadly, in my opinion, there is a whole social justice warrior thing going on, where they're taking legacy characters and changing who plays them so they can be more politically correct.
do you think that is being done to cater to a mainstream taste, to a mainstream audience?
I would say so, or at least to alienate the traditional person who we quote unquote would call a fanboy.
Why would?
Because
Yeah, why?
because you're taking a legacy character. So instead of Iron Man being Tony Stark, now Iron Man becomes Iron Heart, and it's 13-year-old Riri Williams instead. Well, if it just wanted to do a character named Riri Williams as an iron suit, that'd be one thing. But if she's literally replacing Iron Man, a legacy hero, and you've been reading Iron Man for the last 5 years to 25 years or 40 years, it's a big fu. And then you hear that, and that's where even fanboys are treated derisively by the very companies that used to make money off of them. Like, well, we're not in the business of just writing superheroes for the fanboy, and that is, I hate to say it, where fanboy does become a gendered term, because then in the pejorative, it's always a bunch of middle-aged men who just like shit the way they like it, and they can't conceive. And in fact, if you so describe derisively, it's no longer even used to describe a child. It's used to describe a man-child. So, that's that for those people who hear fanboy still slung in the same way that the words nerd and geek used to be derisively slung.
Well,
So it's not all dominance, is what I'm saying. There's definitely still ways to make the fanboy be shamed and
well, I think, well, okay, so you think that they're trying to appeal to a mainstream taste. I think they're trying to appeal to another tiny little fanboy constituency. This is the fanboy that might be interested more in those themes, in like
Well, I
an
mean,
SJW's theme.
you could certainly absolutely say that, and I wouldn't disagree with you. But I'm just saying, the people who are the traditional followers of said work, right, especially attacking a legacy character, changing a legacy character's identity, that is basically telling the fanboy, you've invested in this person's storyline. Another thing you see in DC a lot is the retcon, where at DC, Marvel might do this too, but DC is constantly changing every few years what the laws of reality are. So like, oh, that story that happened 5 years ago in Superman, well, it doesn't exist anymore, even though it was canon for such a long time.
Well, I think one of the reasons you're getting stuff like that, okay, is because this is the era of the fanboy, and to appeal to fanboys, instead of trying to appeal to the mainstream taste, you have to appeal to tiny fanatical constituencies, right?
Yeah, but I would say that if your
that would be drawn to the work, right? You have to attract.
Well, but I was saying
in the olden days, in the mainstream. Okay, well, let me finish my point. In the olden days, you had to make work. You already had like, if you were making a TV show, you already had a mainstream platform. You already had millions of eyeballs. So you would have to make content that would please all those people. But in the era of the fanboy, you can't get those eyeballs. You don't automatically have those eyeballs. So you have to make content that appeals to a tiny little fanatical group that's going to seek out your content for reasons that you put in there to appeal to them, right?
I see the
you have
opposite,
to draw
man.
them.
I just see the opposite. I see instead the reverse. I see like comic book companies, especially I'll pick on comic book companies, say, we need a younger, hipper market. I know the average comic book reader is 40 and it's a dude or a woman who's been reading it for 20 years, but we want the young people. What do the young people like? Well, they like skateboarding. So there's it's a great episode of The Simpsons,
right?
Where they came up with that cartoon character to appeal to a young, hipper demographic. What was the name of that? Like a dog.
Poochie.
Poochie, who like surfed and he's a rapping dog who's a skateboarder who has his hat on backwards. So I think that's
right.
Poochie is the ultimate insult to fanboys in any genre of art.
But look, I think
that is. Let me finish my point, Mendo, which is that whether it's comic books or it's a TV show or it's a movie, you do see these things where the people will have the money or the power. Like, I don't know if I'm really comfortable with being that fanboy. I better think, what does the mainstream want, and give it to them. So I do feel like that war between the fanboy and the fangirl versus I gotta go for the lowest common denominator, or I've gotta what it's like. I hate this word, but it's such a good one. Like, I'm gonna make a science fiction movie, but people who don't like science fiction, or insert blank.
Right. Well, I think Poochie is like a good example of what we're talking about here. Of what I'm talking about is it's like a change. It's like we've changed to a new era because, okay, so back in the olden days, if a TV show, a TV show on a major network, they needed new viewers. The only people watching are old people. The only people watching are certain demo. They want to get younger people to watch, so they introduce a character that appeals to the young people. So they keep the old cast, but now they have a character that'll appeal to young people. But so they're trying to appeal to everybody. So like in the olden days, if you had a show where you wanted to have white people to watch, black people to watch, women to watch, you'd have a black character, you have a woman character, you have a male character. You're trying to appeal to a rainbow, right?
Yeah.
It's like if you watch Steven Spielberg's Hook, right? You have the Lost Boys, who are a rainbow cast of boys, right?
Yeah.
I think we're going to an era where you're not going to see that anymore.
I disagree. I think if anything, now you'll see like a paraplegic Lost Boy. You'll see a gender fluid Lost Boy. You'll see, and that's okay. Actually, that's totally fine, because I don't really think anyone's going to fanboy out and go, man, you're changing up the look of Lost Boys. I don't need to be a Lost Boys purist as far as it relates to Pinocchio. And that's a good point. And in fact, I'm going to change this for a second. I think the dark side of fanboyism is there is also a restriction on what you can do. Like, I got into a discussion with a friend of mine the other day about who should be the next James Bond. And I'm a big fan of Idris Elba. And I actually think, he's getting up there, fair enough. And if you think he shouldn't be James Bond because, well, the dude's like closer to 50 than he is to 40, I'm not going to argue the point. I just saw him in Hobbs and Shaw. I think he can pull it off. If someone said to me, oh, no, you can't have a black James Bond. James Bond is always white. All right, so that 100% is the dark side of fanboyism. The inability to see your art form ever evolving and changing with the times or the sensibilities. So it's not like all fanboyism is good. In fact, sometimes it's very reactionary. Sometimes it's a bad thing, I would argue, when something is made just for the fanboy or fangirl.
Well, a good example of that is the Rian Johnson Star Wars, right? The Rian Johnson Star Wars, I feel, it was a great addition. It was well written, it was very well done. But the so-called fanboys supposedly didn't like it, right? I don't know if that's true. I feel like I'm a Star Wars fanboy.
I don't know. I love that everything he does except for that movie. And I do have to admit, as a Star Wars fan, yeah, sure, I was kind of not happy with that.
Really?
But I was not happy with it. I was not happy with any of the modern Star Wars movies. But I can't say it's because I'm a fanboy and they went against canon, or it's just because I think they're very boring films.
I don't know. I liked a lot of the new Star Wars. I liked even Lucas's Star Wars when they came out. What's not to like? They're more Star Wars movies, but Maybe I'm the worst kind of fanboy that just does like stuff. But you know,
I mean, yeah,
I have not
possibly.
liked. I'll tell you the truth. I have not liked the last Star Wars movie and the one before Rian Johnson's Star Wars. What's it called? I can't remember anything now.
Oh,
But
Rebel One.
no. But
That's my
I'm
favorite of
thinking
the
the
new
one in the
ones.
trilogy. I'm thinking the one in the trilogy. But
Oh, there's three, right? There's the. You know what, folks? I'm so sorry. I am not a fanboy of
how good of
contemporary
fanboys
Star
are
Wars.
we?
Not well, apparently not much. If we're like going, it's episode 11. And yeah, I call Star
Well, I
Wars
don't like
episode
anything.
5 A New Hope Star Wars 1. So
I don't. I
obviously,
hardly like anything J.J. Abrams is involved in.
oh, that's a future
But
episode
that's a
that
future
we will.
episode. But
In fact, maybe this is a good time to get off because that we've teased it out. So later on we'll talk about reboots. We're not running away from reboots, and we're not running away from J.J. Abrams, but that is for another day.
I don't know. This discussion's been kind of all over the place.
What
But
are
I
you?
think have we
What is
covered it?
your? Well, I was going to say before we go, what are your favorite things to fanboy out on? What are your top 3 fanboy loves? I'll give you mine if that'll help.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thoughts. So I would definitely say music is a thing I totally fanboy out on. TV is another thing I very much fanboy out on, especially superhero and science fictional TV. And if you in music, I guess classic rock, very much a fanboy of. And the third thing that I totally like fanboy out on is musical theater, as long as it's not contemporary musical theater. And those things I will. I want to use the word geek out on. I'm going to geek out on theater. I'm going to geek out on science fiction superhero TV shows. I'm going to geek out on music from the 70s and 60s. But those are my areas where I love to fanboy out. How about you?
I guess I'm a huge fanboy of arts and entertainment. I mean, I'm totally.
Oh, comedy,
look at this show.
comedy. We're big fanboys of comedy.
Yes. I'm big into Marcel Duchamp.
You're a big fanboy of art.
Yeah, that's right. But I think one of the reasons the whole fanboy era strikes me so bizarre is because we're both nerds and geeks, right? I mean,
Yeah,
we grew up in an era when nerds and geeks were the minority, right?
Yeah.
And which is, if you watch what is it? Oh God, Harvey Picard, the Harvey Picard movie.
American Splendor, yeah.
Right. You watch American Splendor, you could see a time when like nerds and geeks were in the minority, right? I mean,
right.
I love his friend that who drives like hours to go see Star Trek or something. That was hilarious. So we both remember that era, and like.
So for you, movies.
I want to say that
art.
That I feel like I've never really been that big of a fanboy. I mean, my experience in these communities.
Oh, no. I've had discussions with you, buddy, where you will literally spend 40 minutes on a film with such detail of the oeuvre, where it comes from, the genre. No.
But we're not. But I'm not a blind, and you're not either. We're not blind lovers of the movie. We're not blind.
So
we have criticisms, right?
I have 2 questions.
The fanboy, the modern fanboy doesn't seem to have any criticisms. The modern fanboy just blindly loves. And I think that's bleeding into politics and everything, our whole culture. It's because if you don't blindly love something, you don't Google it.
I don't believe the whole
structure of our culture
I don't
today.
believe the fanboy or fangirl blindly loves. I think they love wisely. And here I just want to open this up to the audience. I have 2 questions for you guys in the audience and gals, women and women, ladies and gentlemen, dominant Heron. One is, what is it that you fanboy or fangirl over? What are your top 3 things to just get lost in? And do you think that the fanboy, the fangirl in our society is a good thing? Like I think it might be, that they love as aficionados would love, which is with a great passion, but also a wisdom? Or how would you say, Randall, they love blindly?
Love blindly. You know what? I remember. I think I just.
All right. Well, let
me just say. I just remembered this.
Where can they leave their comments before you answer?
Well, they could leave them on Facebook. They could leave them on our site. But I just
leave them on Facebook or on our site.
Facebook's probably good. But I just wanted to say that I remember I was a huge fanboy of Andy Warhol in college. Enormous. I probably
As one
more.
should be. As one should be.
I think I more blindly loved Andy Warhol than anything else in my life.
He is a great artist. I've seen a lot of his work. We should definitely do a show on him at some point. All right. Well, we really want to hear your thoughts and comments on this topic. I'm Chris.
I'm Randall.
Thanks for watching our show.